This is the 1987 Buick Regal GNX, and it's a muscle car. You heard right. A car made in 1987, complete with impact-absorbing bumpers, a catalytic converter, and, believe it or not, a V6 engine. In fact, it's not just a muscle car. It happens to be the fastest accelerating production sedan ever made. Now here's the real punchline. It's a Buick. The Buick GNX is truly one of the most incredible cars ever made. Its 231 cubic inch turbocharged V6 engine is capable of producing over 275 net horsepower. And the car's chassis is designed to put every ounce of that horsepower on the ground. The GNX is also an intelligent car. Thanks to all its onboard computers, every aspect of the car's performance is being monitored and adjusted 1,000 times a second to deliver peak performance at any moment in time. From the grille to the rear spoiler, this car's individual components were so carefully designed that once assembled, they ceased to be parts, and the GNX became one single thing. Mike Doble, manager of Buick's Advanced Special Vehicles Department, guided the GNX's development.
We realized we had to do it smart. We still wanted a rocket. We wanted a safe, dependable, secure car, but also one that still launched well, that felt well, and that was very, very good in handling both performance and straight line acceleration. But we had to do it by tweaking and twisting and channeling and using technology to get there.
The way the GNX slams you back in the seat reminds you of the good old days. But make no mistake, there's no good old days engineering anywhere in this car. This Buick is pure 21st century high-tech, and it has to be. When this car was designed, the new reality of 93-octane, $1-a-gallon high test said the old ways wouldn't work anymore.
In the 60s and 70s, you threw weight at it. You threw dual carburetors. You threw 4 carburetors at it. Weight didn't matter, just more horsepower, more torque. But back in those days, we kind of owned the market. We found out since that market was hard to maintain.
The GNX is the ultimate stage of development of this car, the Regal Grand National. Between 1984 and 1987, the Grand National and its more colorful stablemate, the Regal T-Type, sneaked up on a lot of unsuspecting muscle cars and put them away. Not with the usual blast of noise, but with the quiet, dignified whoosh. For muscle car fans from the 60s, these cars are a throwback to the days when big cubic inches ruled the road.
Nailing the throttle on a Grand National was a combination of being shot out of a cannon and getting launched off an aircraft carrier. I have never in my life seen a car that could accelerate so quickly and actually watch the needle sweep across the speedometer, just zoom across. It was just unbelievable.
For people too young to remember that rush of 60s horsepower, the Turbo Buicks are cars perfectly made for today's high-performance enthusiast.
I like to drive a car that has cruise control, windshield wipers work, gets 20 miles a gallon, and can come out to the track and run mid-12s.
With space-age computer technology, combined with Buick's 100-year-old heritage of building better cars, the Regal Grand National and the GNX rekindled a fire that had all but gone out 15 years earlier. Stay with us as Buick convinces a little 231 cubic inch engine that it's Jack the Giant Killer on the American Muscle Car. Since the earliest days of the automobile, there have been some foolproof ways of making a car go faster, and Buick knew every one of them. The easiest way, of course, was to build a bigger engine. So in 1908, Buick created this car, the Bug. It had a 4-cylinder engine that measured 622 cubic inches. Going by the old formula of big engine and a light body, the Buick Bug may very well have been the first muscle car. Thankfully, there were more ways of going fast than just making monster motors, and Buick led the industry in finding more horsepower. While the other automakers were still building flatheads, Buick's overhead valve engines were tearing up America's racetracks. The 1938 straight-eight Fireball engine with compound carburation was the fastest of its day, which was amazing considering the size and weight of these big and luxurious Buicks. When the muscle cars hit the streets in the mid-60s, once again Buick hit the market with a package that combined good looks, luxury, and massive power. They called it the Skylark Grand Sport. The Grand Sport's 400 and 455 engines produced tremendous torque, making the Buick GS a standout performer at the drag strip, without sacrificing one bit of Buick's legendary comfort and high style. But by the mid-70s, even the mighty Stage 1 Buicks were gone. The auto industry went from making horsepower to making fuel economy. But a few people at Buick weren't satisfied with this situation. They knew they could make fun cars again. They just had to do it differently. So a group of engineers got together and literally redefined the muscle car. They wanted to keep all the important muscle car stuff like blinding acceleration and great styling, but they had to lose the things that didn't work in the 80s, like poor handling and bad fuel economy. At the time, the Buick Regal was mixing it up pretty well on the NASCAR tracks. And even in the 80s, the old connection between racing and sales was still there.
There was still that strong belief, which I think is true today with many cars, that you win on Sunday, you sell on Monday.
The car which would become the next great muscle car was the 1982 Regal Grand National. It was more of a cosmetic exercise than a muscle car, but it was a start. Now, all Buick had to do was create a muscle car power plant to go with this excellent body. And the good old days will be back again. We'll see just how they did that when the American muscle car returns. Thanks to Buick's racetrack success, the Regal was already a well-known race car. But on the street, the 82 Regal Grand National was just another stripe and decal package. But all that was about to change.
Obviously, with fuel economy and emissions and the political pressures, we knew we had to move to something that was a little bit more economical and a little bit more environmentally friendly. And at the same time, we wanted to develop an engine that had performance that could match most V8 powertrains.
Power was the essential muscle car ingredient. For the next generation Grand National, Buick had chosen an engine that delivered good mileage and also had pretty good racing credentials. The 3.8-liter V6. Buick had been a pioneer in V6 engines as far back as 1962, when they offered one in their new compact special. But the V6 that would become the world's next great muscle car motor bore little resemblance to that early engine. By 1984, Buick's turbo engine group was ready with the engine that would turn the Grand National into a real muscle car. Would transform the 3.8-liter V6 from a grocery getter engine into a booster rocket was a device called a turbocharger.
Then all of a sudden they turned around and they dropped this turbo V6 in it, and it was like a change from night to day.
The 84 Grand National's 3.8-liter or 231 cubic inch turbo engine was light years ahead of earlier V6s. It made 200 net horsepower and 300 foot-pounds of torque, making it the most potent six-cylinder engine in GM's inventory. Along with the Garrett turbocharger, it featured electronically controlled Bosch sequential fuel injection, a specially tuned aluminum intake manifold, a higher pressure fuel pump, and a new mass airflow sensor. 84 Grand National started turning up at drag strips, doing quiet burnouts, and whispering their way down the quarter mile to low 14-second runs, which was good performance even for a high-compression 60s V8. For a 231 cubic inch 6, it was mind-blowing. But more than a few GN owners found going this fast, this quietly, to be a strange experience.
When I drove that car for the first time, I had to roll the windows down. I couldn't hear the engine.
What really stopped people in their tracks was the Grand National's menacing all-black appearance.
Luxury, high performance, and that evil-looking black paint job. I mean, those just blew everybody's mind.
Buick made 2,000 Grand Nationals in 1984, all of them blacked out from bumper to bumper. This was truly a Buick with a bad attitude. Even 60s muscle car fans agreed that the GN did everything well.
It's a lot tighter. It's a stronger car. The suspension is more solid. Overall, it's a better engineered car than the cars of the 60s.
The Grand National and the Regal Turbo T-Type were carried over unchanged for 1985, putting 4,100 more of these bonsai mobiles on the streets. With all these turbo cars out there now, other muscle car owners had to be a little cautious around Buick Regals.
Occasionally I have fun with Corvettes because one or two of them will look at it and challenge me, and this will beat most Corvettes.
But two things were about to happen in 1986, both of them predictable. Turbo car owners were finding ways to hot rod these V6 wonder engines, and so was Buick. Stay with us as Buick goes ultra high tech on the American muscle car. For the past 2 years, the people with those black Regals had been sneaking up on big-inch Detroit iron until Grand National owners couldn't get a race, except with another GN. The Turbo T-Type Regals were the real sneaky ones. They were just as fast, and they weren't even black. But just like hot rodders everywhere, Buick's engineers weren't about to quit while there was more horsepower inside this engine. And there was a lot still there. For 1986, the engine's bottom end remained the same, but on top, a lot had been changed. From its now open plenum intake manifold to better electronics, Buick's continuous improvement program for the Turbo 3.8 increased its output more than 10%. It now cranked out 235 net horsepower at 4,400 RPM and 330 foot-pounds of torque at 2,800 RPM. This year, the turbo was moved to the front of the engine, and it now fed compressed air into the intake manifold through a clever little speed secret, an intercooler. This device cools the heated air coming out of the turbocharger to make the engine's intake charge more dense and able to produce more horsepower. With the addition of the intercooler, this little engine that could had become the little engine that could kick your butt. It could now rip off high 13-second quarter miles at almost 100 miles an hour in showroom stock trim. A little tweaking, and the engine responded like the true race motor it was, which caused modern-day muscle car enthusiasts to jump all over this car with not just wrenches, but laptop computers.
It tells me my air-fuel ratios and things, and I can actually overlay that on some of the other screens and fine-tune the air-fuel based on the weather.
But regardless of its racing nature, its builders never let anyone forget that this car was Buick from bumper to bumper. Buicks were premium American motor cars, and everything about the Grand National's fit and finish said so. The 86 Regal's base price of $11,562 put it in the upper range of GM's mid-sized cars. The WE2 Grand National option package inflated this figure by $3,574, but it was loaded with good stuff. No fewer than 23 items, like air conditioning, console, a leather-wrapped steering wheel, fast ratio power steering, and excellent bucket seats, with Buick's distinctive Go Fast logo, were included in the GN package. Other GN items included special 15x7 chrome steel wheels and two 1565R steel-belted radial tires, power front discs, the TH200R 4-speed automatic overdrive transmission, a 342 rear end, the rear spoiler, and special Grand National badging. And of course, that bad black paint job. For those who wanted something other than basic black, the Grand National's fraternal twin brother, the Regal T-Type, offered all the same performance and luxury options. Plus, You had your choice of colors. By 1987, almost 8,000 Turbo Ts were on the streets, looking for all the world like plain V6 Regals, which was a dirty trick to play on V8 owners. 1987 would be the Turbo car's best sales year yet, with production scheduled for 10,000 cars. But just like the last days of the 60s muscle cars, the end was near for the turbo cars. But Buick wasn't about to let this car just disappear without doing something special. We'll be back with the amazing GNX on the American Muscle Car. With the T-Type and the GN, Buick had done the impossible. They had reinvented the muscle car and updated it for the 80s. The little 3.8-liter V6 had grown from a 180-horsepower novelty engine into a 245-horsepower Stormer in just 4 years. And these cars had proved that going fast didn't have to come at the expense of luxury, comfort, and gas mileage. And now, word came down from the ivory tower that after 1987, there would be no more of them. But this time, it wasn't a 70s we hate cars management edict that killed the GN. Typical of Buick, it was a very logical engineering decision.
Well, unfortunately, what really happened was the body went away. If you remember, 1988, they started the new front-wheel drive body, and all the G bodies were discontinued. That whole rear-wheel platform was now extinct, and they really didn't have a front-wheel drive platform that could adequately handle the torque and the output of the turbo V6.
What happened next would make automotive history.
We knew that the production was running out. We were stopping production of the Grand Nationals. The public knew it as well. So we knew we needed to celebrate that movement of the car and its departure. So the task was to build a new Grand National, a special edition that outperformed the Grand National, but also was the Grand National to end all Grand National production.
What they built was the GNX. With the 87 Grand National as a baseline, they created a modern American classic in every way, from appearance to performance. From the car's new GNX badging to its flared fender wells and 16 by 8-inch BBS wheels to the classic Buick portholes, this was a collector's car, even before it was built.
Every car was sold before the first car was built. That doesn't often happen. And when we saw the articles that it had, and a positive media exposure in the press that it had already received from the two prototype runs, there's little choice. We had to build this car.
A special car like the GNX would have to have more power. But by now, the Turbo V6 was so well developed that there wasn't much left to modify. For help, Buick called on McLaren, the world-famous racing engine builder, to find a few more horses. Along with some reprogrammed electronics, the GNX was treated to a new ceramic-coated turbo impeller and a specially designed intercooler. Combined with an enlarged turbo exhaust housing and a less restrictive exhaust system, this helped the GNX's power plant max out at 276 horsepower and 360 foot-pounds of torque. But by far, the major changes took place in the car's suspension.
Now, we knew we had a lot more power going back to the road surface, so we knew we needed to make sure we tied down that rear end. So we couldn't allow the pig or the differential to rotate on load. So we introduced a ladder bar, a longitudinal rod, if you will, that tracked almost halfway up through the car, meeting at a mount point just aft of the rear end of the transmission. That ladder bar kept the differential from rotating on torque load. Instead, the rear end of the car lifts up. That keeps the tires planted firmly on the ground, less tire spin, far better performance.
All this work cut more than a second off the GN's 0 to 60 times, and its quarter-mile performance was astonishing. The car cornered like a sports car, and today, almost 15 years later, it still looks like the meanest car on the road. But maybe the car's greatest gift to the muscle car world was that it taught Mike Doble and the GNX team something very special about the love people have for performance cars.
I think the strongest message was that we gained kind of a lesson or awareness of the fervor that the market had for niche vehicles. They wanted vehicles that were unique, that were special to them. The cars that set a statement that kind of meet their lifestyles and made them feel a little unique and special when they're in it.
Even though they were only in production for a few years, the turbo cars from Buick created a following as strong and enthusiastic as any muscle car ever made. In 1987, when Buick canceled the Grand National, Buick dealers all over America were inundated with orders for one of the last ones. The demand was so great that Buick extended its production run until over 20,000 1987 GNs were eventually made. Today's Grand National and T-Type owners range from people who raced big block Fords and Chevys in the 60s to young people getting their first taste of going fast and loving every minute of it. Bill Savino and his two sons, Mike and Dan, each own a turbo Buick. It was Bill who started this family trend.
I drove in '87, new in the dealership, and I fell in love with it. So I just got my chance last year to buy an '87 Grand National. Well, after I got my first Grand National, Mike decided he wanted to buy one. And then Dano got the bug. Dano bought his '85.
I've known about him since probably 8 years old. Said when I turned 16, 17, I'd like to get one. So they're a little older, they have a little more money. So had to get a cheaper one and stumbled across this and bought it.
Thanks for watching. And remember, don't crush them, restore them.